Hey, this is BJ Rudell at Duke University's Center for Political Leadership, Innovation, and Service, or POLIS, and I'm coming to you once again at the Broadhead Center on Duke University's campus with another episode of the Political Student Podcast. And with me today, I'm happy to say, is Duke Senior Claire Gibbs. Claire, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. So Claire, my first question for you is, where are you from?
Sure. I am from a suburb of Kansas City on the Kansas side. I'm coming to you all the way from my Dorothy Wizard of Oz roots in Kansas.
Did people rib you when you were growing? I mean, even though you lived in Kansas, so everyone probably ribbed each other. But is that something that you still get? Like, oh, Kansas, Wizard of Oz.
No, definitely here. Every time I meet someone at Duke, I am their first person that they've met from the state of Kansas consistently. And I'm like, well, there are others around, but I guess I'm the representative. And then the next thing is that the only thing they know about Kansas is the Wizard of Oz. And so not entirely representative of my experience in Kansas, but at least they're somewhat familiar with the state and its weather patterns.
Well, for the past 20 to 25 years, I've been very good friends with a bunch of people from Wichita.
Sure.
Who I met back in 95.
Sure.
And I know that the largest ball of twine is in Kansas.
In the state of Kansas. Yeah, it's like right off of I-70, major highway. I've never, in fact, seen it, but I have seen Big Brutus. That's in southeast Kansas.
Okay.
And that was the biggest whole, tractor, some piece of farming equipment when they were making the man-made coal pools, who knows, but there are lots of large things in Kansas.
So all of you out there planning a trip to Kansas,
yes.
Big Brutus and ball of twine.
That's it, nothing else.
And stop by Claire's house and say hello. So you're in Kansas City. Is there a rivalry between Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas? Is there a kinship? What's the deal there?
If there's a rivalry, Kansas City, Missouri is winning. So I like to say that I reside in the state of Kansas, but all my money, aside from my taxes, are spent in Missouri. So
there's just more happening over there?
There's more happening, seemingly. So I'm about 5 minutes from Missouri. Pretty much every day I'm home. I cross the state line. My best friend lives on the Missouri side. All my favorite restaurants are on the Missouri side. So most of my time is spent in Missouri, but I stole the education from Kansas and I pay the taxes in Kansas. So I guess it's a good enough relationship there.
I'm imagining an advertisement, tourism in Missouri, where a bunch of Kansas City Kansians are on the commercial saying, I live in Kansas, but I wish I lived in Missouri.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it now, too. I sure could.
Cool. Well, tell me a little bit about growing up there. What are some of your earliest memories just being a Kansan growing up there?
I loved it. It was easy to dog, when I was there. I was never really a fan of it. I was like, oh my goodness, get me out of Kansas. And then I think a switch went off when I was, in my senior year of high school, about ready to leave. It's always when you're ready to leave, that you really begin to appreciate it. I thought it was a fabulous place to grow up. I really liked Midwestern values. Especially where I was near the metropolitan area, it was an increasingly diverse place with a lot of different opportunities. But I didn't realize that until I was 17 years old. Until then, it was a boring nowheresville with not a lot happening, and that's a regret of mine. I think it was all there, and I just didn't see it. So I was very satisfied with my childhood, or I am now. But yeah, it was an interesting place to be, especially because Kansas City, you can drive 40 minutes in any direction and be in the middle of nowhere, and you don't hit anything for 7 hours, right? Once you get 30 minutes west, there's nothing until you get to Denver, essentially. And so I definitely was in a unique position because I can say I'm a Kansan, I'm from Kansas, but my Kansas experience was very different than, what Kansas really is.
So when you refer to Midwestern values, like, are there such a are the Midwestern values of Kansas City different than the Midwestern values of farm country Kansas?
Definitely. It's a very different perspective across the board. We come from different positions and see the world very differently, generally speaking, right? I'm not going to blanket statement anything, but there's almost a tension, I would say, sometimes between the people who are from, the Kansas City metropolitan area and the rest of the state. Just because we do have a very different understanding of the state. Politics certainly plays a really large role in that. There was actually an interesting study that essentially squared off the metropolitan area by highways, and that in 2016, the metro area, sectioned off by various highways, was one of the only areas in the state that went for the Democratic candidate in 2016, Hillary Clinton. The rest of the state was entirely red, and so It was really interesting to see that there was in a way, a physical line that separated, these voting areas. And so, that's obviously a very surface level assessment of the situation. There are lots of commonalities too. I'd say we all really like ranch dressing. I'm a proponent of ranch dressing. I carry that to North Carolina. And so there are lots of commonalities, undoubtedly, but there are differences as well, for sure.
So what are some of your earliest, an early political memory for you?
Yeah, so being an individual with a disability, I would say that my awareness of the political is very associated with my my situation and my reliance on the state, right? So when I was 5 years old, I signed up to be on a Medicaid waiver. So that really positioned me, as a recipient of the state and someone who's, whether or not they would approve my new wheelchair or my surgery, different, personal care hours for me was in a way political, right? Because it was determined by who was making those decisions, the various budgets, what their beliefs on Medicaid and Medicare were. And so my understanding, my political enlightenment was not necessarily voluntary. It was really thrown on me and my family as well. But I at this point I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it brought me into a world that I'm very interested in, and a world that I'm very excited about, at a personal level, beyond just an academic level or just a simple interest like this. There are stakes for me in the political world, just like there are stakes for millions of other people. And so if I want to be involved, I think it's really critical that I employ my stakes in communicating with others, and whether it's constituents or representatives. So it's a nice position that, ironically, it's a nice position that I'm in because I have an understanding and an emotional interest, but I also think that I can, back away from it and see the greater game that's going on. So
when you're 5 and you get signed up for Medicaid, I assume your parents are signing you up at that point.
Yes.
So what was that dynamic like? Where are they explaining to you this is why we're waiting to find out? What's that process like for you as someone who's at an age where
it's hard to understand?
Yeah, the macro.
Yeah. I would say that I probably didn't understand, right? In the same way that I didn't value Kansas City until I was 17. I didn't understand or value, my context and situation until much later. But that doesn't mean I wasn't aware of it, right? I knew that my babysitters were not normal babysitters, right? They were people who worked for me, were paid by the state of Kansas, and had to help me in a way that normal babysitters didn't, right?
Right.
And so that was, my awareness level, and it took time for me to understand the implications and for me to understand the fact that I was on a wait list for, 2 years before I was able to get on the particular waiver that I was on, and that, had I worded something differently or, had something be different about my situation, that maybe I would never have, gotten the assistance that I needed and the services that I needed. And so the awareness was definitely something that came with time. But what's interesting is that, the experience that my parents underwent was really transformative for them as well. A lot changed when both my sister and I have the same disease. A lot changed upon that diagnosis in their life. That's bound to happen at many levels, but it changed in a political sense as well. My dad was a son of a military guy. He was an Army brat. He grew up in Texas. He was a rather staunch conservative. And then he realized that, my daughters are disabled. They're minority characters in America. They're going to have to rely on services provided by the government and innovative healthcare and research. And, that doesn't necessarily align with the conservative platform. And so he made this 180 turn.
Wow.
And
And you know that only from talking with him?
Yeah.
Is he very open about it?
Yeah, he's pretty open about it. And it's funny because his parents are still very conservative individuals watching Fox News pretty constantly. And that really upsets him. But it's interesting because, he came from that perspective, and he was able... I don't know if this is, as possible anymore in 2019 or 2020, but he was able to change his beliefs given his context. And so I think that's, very cool. It's very admirable. And it's wild to see what a transformation it's been, because now, he's the most, out of my parents, between my mom and my dad, he's the most politically engaged one. He's constantly calling representatives. He's always, he's an activist in the truest form. And he didn't, that would have never been my first guess.
That's fascinating.
It is. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting position that he's in, for sure.
So do you find yourself lobbying for yourself? Do you call members? What's that process like if you do?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. My dad and I are in cahoots about it, and we always try to take as creative as an angle as possible when we're reaching out to representatives, just so we can, make them question. Obviously, we're not speaking to the representatives themselves, but their staffers, question what's going on. And yeah, when there are healthcare bills, Medicaid, Medicare, spending appropriations, everything, all the I'm definitely engaged in the capacity that I can be. And what's interesting is that I've been on the flip side as well, right? So I was an intern in Senator McCaskill's office in Kansas City, where a big part of my role was talking to constituents and answering the phones when they called. And so that was a really kind of funny summer for me, because I was answering calls and my dad was making them. Not necessarily to me, but obviously. But
you're I know, Dad. I know. I'll tell her.
Yeah, I'll pass that on, Father. No, but it was really funny, and so I would share, the creative things that people would tell me, and then he could use that how he wanted to.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You're hey, this is a good way to do it.
Yes, definitely. And this is where you lose us, So it was a funny summer for sure.
What? So you also then worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign?
I did.
Right?
I did.
Tell us a little about that.
I was a state fellow for the state of Kansas on the Hillary for America campaign. So I actually, my county, another teenager and we ran the phone banks and the canvassing activities for volunteers who were like 3 times our age. So I'd say that summer the average age of a volunteer was like about 65 years old. I had a couple coming from the retirement homes. Their friends would pick them up and they would come. And then my friend and I, we were 18. This was the summer before our freshman year. And yeah, it was a very interesting position that we were in. But simultaneously, I was working on a smaller campaign. I was doing a state senate campaign. And so instead of being an organizer, I was a participant. So I would do the phone banking and I would do the canvassing. And that was a very interesting summer. It was very hot outside, walking the neighborhoods and you know, getting votes. But it was a very interesting experience because, you know, we had the state senate campaign of a 23-year-old guy who had just graduated from college. At the same time as, you know, the presidential campaign. You know, with you know,
stakes couldn't be higher.
Exactly. And so it was an interesting dichotomy for sure. But I think I'm really glad that I had both experiences simultaneously.
So what was your pitch on a cold call for the state senate candidate, 23-year-old?
Yes.
What do you say? You know, they pick up. What do you say?
That was quite a while ago, but it wasn't the most difficult campaign to run, interestingly, because the incumbent wasn't a very popular man. So it was actually a really good comparison because the incumbent was a pretty old guy. You know, he was probably 65 years old. And the population in that area was, you know, a pretty young, hip, generally speaking, or increasingly so, area. And so it wasn't the hardest call at first, but I was just there for the primary. And unfortunately, and so we were already campaigning against the incumbent in the primary, which was interesting because there wasn't much of a Democratic, opponent. And so fortunately, I spoke to a lot of other Democrats, which was, you know, that's always fun.
Helpful.
That's always a good way to, you know, start your experience on the phone talking to people. But soon enough, we started to transition once he won the primary. But the sad irony was that the incumbent lost in his primary. So then it became a whole different election.
The calculus changed.
And it changed for, you know, not in his favor, not in my guy's favor, unfortunately. But the story's not over. So my guy lost. The 23-year-old lost to, you know, a middle-aged woman. I was, you know, I'm all about, you know, females being elected. So that was, you know, at least that was progress in a sense. But within the past month, or recently, she flipped. So she left the Republican Party in office to become. So there were like 3 or 4 in a row that switched parties, and so I'm sure like my 23-year-old candidate was just like, what is this?
I can't win.
You know, it's like, what happened here? You know, the calculus, it's changing.
Exactly. Now he's got to become a Republican.
Or something. No, I think if he runs again, he should be in a good position. So we'll see. But it was an interesting and
that's fascinating.
Continues to be an interesting experience for sure.
That's really cool to be part of that on a micro level. And then on a macro level, like you're calling on behalf of Hillary Clinton's campaign, you're canvassing.
Yes.
So walk us through canvassing a little bit.
I was actually canvassing for both for both campaigns. We did canvassing trips in Iowa for Hillary because because they wrote off Kansas a little bit for the reasons that I talked about earlier. And so, but the canvassing was much more in a way, aggressive with the 23-year-old, for me at least, because, it was my community, my area, my locals. And so, and it was also, a 90-degree August day. So that complicated it for sure. But I think I'll always remember my canvassing experiences, because it would be my friend and I, and then the candidate himself. So we would drive around in my wheelchair accessible minivan on like a Monday evening. He would be wearing his tie and his button up and then eating soup in my car. And I was like, what are you doing? You can't eat soup in a car. And like, it was so bizarre to me.
Spill it all over you.
Exactly. But it would be my friend and I, we'd go out together, and then the candidate would go out on his own in the area. And so we'd have, our sheets of paper with the addresses and the names. And what was interesting was, the accessibility of the homes that I was going to, right? So most homes, shockingly, have a series of stairs, up to the front door. And so even my house does, right? I have another entrance. And so it was a matter of teamwork for sure. So I'd send my friend up to knock on the door, and then she was very kind and would, step down next to me, so that it wasn't that she was at the front door and I was, 3 feet behind her at the bottom of the stairs. It was a more even playing field. And it certainly, I think, confused a number of constituents who opened their door, and they were like, okay, where are these people? And sometimes it was much further away, right? Sometimes there were a series of stairs, and I would be in like shouting distance. And so they'd walk out, come down to our level, and we'd talk about, the candidate and what was going on. And so it was a very interesting experience for sure. One that I can't shake, I'll always remember. And then when I wasn't with my friend, I'd go out with my dad even, and we'd canvass together. And so I think it was somewhat, it was peculiar for both ends, like when the people opened their door and they saw us, and when we were out there and we were talking to them, it was, maybe I would hope an eye-opening experience for the constituents, because it certainly was. It was for me too. So
that's really cool. Very quickly, do you want to run someday?
No, I don't. I don't think I do. It's a question that I'm asked quite a bit. My English teacher in high school is like, I'll drop everything to help you become president of the United States of America. And I was like, oh, please don't. I love you, but please. No, I'm much more interested in the background, what's going on behind the scenes, and supporting a person that I really believe in. And so, no, I don't want to run, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe in, having an emotional and personal connection to my candidate. I think that's, the equation for success. And so I'm not afraid of having, my heart in the race, if you will, even if it's not my own personal heart, but I'm fighting for someone I really believe in, and so that's the ideal situation for sure.
That's very cool. Claire, thank you for talking with me
Yes,
today.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Cool. This is once again BJ Rudell with Duke University's Center for Political Leadership, Innovation, and Service, or POLIS, with another episode of the Political Student Podcast here in the Broadhead Center at Duke University's campus. I want to thank Claire Gibbs once again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.